Hello there. So we are for an early session today. And as I had told you in the last episode of AI Now yesterday, we actually were going to do a discussion on Taiwan and Tibet and the context of how Chinese colonialism is happening in the Indo-Pacific region. So we have invited a very distinguished scholar, I must say. And I've been thinking to discuss about Taiwan and Tibet for some time. I had a discussion with Mr. Salvatore Babones from Australia about the Indo-Pacific. I had specific questions about Taiwan as well. So I might take those questions which I had asked him based on his follow up. So let me very humbly introduce the speaker who is with us, and then we can move forward with it. So we have a very distinguished scholar, since I said. Uh, I would like to introduce Dr. Sana Hashmi, if I'm right. She's a visiting fellow at the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation since March 2021. She also was in Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the Institute of International Relations, National Chengchi University in 2020. She is also a non-resident fellow at NextGen Foundation and an affiliated scholar with the Research Institute for Indo-Pacific Affairs, or RIPA. Formerly, she was a consultant in the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and her focus areas were related to ASEAN, which is the Southeast Asian region, and the Indo-Pacific region, of course, with a special reference to China. So welcome, ma'am, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Abhivardhan, and it's my pleasure to be on your show. And I'm looking forward to having a meaningful discussion with you on Taiwan and Tibet.
I'm really grateful to know that. So let's begin and let's make a context out of it. So we understand that the emergence of the People's Republic of China dates back to the Second World War times, and after the Second World War, when we saw that Tibet was colonized, and when the relationship between US and Taiwan emerged. And we very well know that the US-Taiwan relationships starts with the way the Cantonese dealt with the Japanese in the Second World War. And of course, after 1971, when PRC got its permanent membership in the Security Council, maybe after the Bangladesh war, if I'm correct, the Mukti Bahini thing, we saw that the US-Taiwan relations had its own stride. So first basic question is about the American approach to Taiwan and Tibet. And why I'm asking this is because if we come through with some basic understanding of what is going on, then I can put some questions on the context of Taiwan and Tibet accordingly. So if you can give some context on the American approach of how they have been dealing through after Donald Trump's presidency, and how President Biden and the administration are dealing with Taiwan and Tibet. So if you can give a context.
So when Biden administration came, there was this speculation that Biden would be a little softer on China, and I have been in Taiwan for close to 1.5 years, more than 1.5 years. So I was there when this transition was happening, and there was a lot of concern about how America is going to look towards Taiwan, because there were a lot of developments when Trump was there. Of course, I have my own reservations against Trump's Taiwan policy, but at least Taiwan was in the news last year, and American approach was very proactive towards Taiwan. Though, of course, initially Trump wanted to work with China on issues of shared interests such as North Korean proliferation, etc. But we also saw that there was this rise in rivalry between China and the US. And what Trump did with Taiwan was to use Taiwan as a card against China. So, of course, there were a lot of development. There was increase in arms sales and towards Taiwan, and then there were a lot of there were several visits, high-level visits in decades from the US to Taiwan. So, of course, it was a very good development with respect to Taiwan relation with the US, and as well as Taiwan's larger profile at the international level. But what we've also seen since January, that there is a kind of continuity in Biden administration. And in fact, if I may call it, I think it's more action-oriented. US-Taiwan policy is more action-oriented. The focus is, of course, China has always been there when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to US-Taiwan relation, and in fact, Taiwan relation with any other country. China has been a factor, and we can't really overlook that factor. But the point is that if we look at US policy towards Taiwan, it's much more action-oriented than Trump's policy towards Taiwan. So one of the reservations that I had with Trump US Taiwan engagement under Trump was that while there were several developments, huge developments between US and Taiwan, one thing which Trump didn't do was to amplify Taiwan and motivate other countries such as South Korea, Japan, and even India and the Quad countries to look to engage Taiwan more. And I think Biden administration is doing that. And if you look at it, there have been several joint statements between US and Japan and also US and South Korea where the mention of Taiwan was there. Even the G7 statement mentioned Taiwan. So a lot of countries are coming up and speaking in support of Taiwan's participation, meaningful participation at a larger Indo-Pacific platform. And in fact, in the past 6 months, we have seen that there were several developments which were actually very constructive for Taiwan. As I've said, the mention of Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific. Then recently we saw that the TIFA talks for the agreement, the free trade agreement, has just been revived. And then Taiwan representative to the US was also invited to the Biden swearing-in ceremony. And then US also sent vaccines to Taiwan. So there were several developments which I would call it more action-oriented. So I think there's this major difference between Biden and Trump administration policy towards Taiwan.
That sounds interesting. I also consider that the US approach to Taiwan is quite institutional. And as you very rightly stated, that the Biden administration has become more proactive, and it's an action centricity which we are seeing when it comes to Taiwan. So let's understand some context when it comes to the leadership approaches which we expect from the Western countries towards Taiwan, because United States is not alone in that. There are even other countries like Czech Republic who have vociferously supported Taiwan these days. I believe even Poland and the United Kingdom are trying to do that. So the very question that I have here is, how does Taiwan see the Indo-Pacific? And in that sense, maybe after discussing Taiwan, we'll come to Tibet if necessary. But main context is why I wish to understand is that we understand China's approach of the Indo-Pacific. It stems from the economic influence of the Asia-Pacific construct, and from there it wants to leverage on the South China Sea, the Strait of Malacca, and all of the strategic areas. One of these areas is also near the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in the Indian subcontinent area, which is the Indian Ocean. Of course, these are some strategic pointers. Then we have the Far East also, where China has its own issues, and then it couples up with its BRI ambitions. So, what is Taiwan's approach to the Indo-Pacific in general? Because of course we know of the Milk Tea Alliance and the way Taiwan wishes to engage with India also, and we know why India does not have full diplomatic ties with Taiwan. That is very obvious, but in that sense, if we see that Taiwan will emerge its role, and maybe who knows, maybe in 10 or 20 years Taiwan could be added in Quad Plus or something like that, how Taiwan would like to act differently from the People's Republic of China in its way?
First of all, if we look at countries' policies of Indo-Pacific, most of the countries have said that the policies, their Indo-Pacific vision is inclusive. They advocate for free and open Indo-Pacific that has to be inclusive. So by that logic, I think Taiwan is very important, and geographically also Taiwan is located at a very important location for countries that have been embracing the Indo-Pacific. So first thing is that, and also if you ask me how Taiwan is different from China, and in fact, if you look at it, it was India and Japan, and primarily India, that started this phrase that Indo-Pacific has to be inclusive. So that is why I always say that Quad and Indo-Pacific are two different things. Quad has China at the center, whereas Indo-Pacific involves countries that might want to have China as a responsible stakeholder within the Indo-Pacific framework also. And if you look at, for example, Germany's Indo-Pacific vision, in that document, Germany specifically mentioned that they would also welcome China's participation, given it acts as a responsible stakeholder. So Indo-Pacific is not aimed at China. Indo-Pacific is, the main objective is to establish a rules-based order, which is free, open, and inclusive. So that way, China could also be a part of it, and it's a different matter altogether if China wants to be a part of it and doesn't want to be a part of it, because of course it thinks that it's an anti-China coalition, be it Quad, be it Indo-Pacific. But I think it is very important that we should have this distinction between the Quad and the Indo-Pacific. And you mentioned Quad Plus. Quad just has say 4 countries, and Indo-Pacific, there are several countries there are several like-minded democracies that have actually embraced the Indo-Pacific. But apart from these 4 countries, I don't really see a lot of countries interest in the Quad Plus. So if because the thing is, it's overtly aimed. I won't call it aiming at China, but I think China is at the core of the Quad. So the very existence of Quad is actually premised on China, how China's aggression has become a major cause of concern for countries, for these 4 countries. So all of these 4 countries have their respective issues with China. So the idea behind Quad is to cooperate to address issues that are shared concerns and common interests. So China is, of course, one of the major shared concerns for all the 4 countries, but that really doesn't go for all the countries. But of course, EU, in its statement, it actually called China a systemic rival, and all the major countries are seeing China's aggression as a threat to the rules-based order. So, of course, it's a major cause of concern. But given a chance, they would all welcome China to be a part of it and play a meaningful role in establishing a rules-based order. And so I don't think that, of course, Taiwan would want to play a larger role in the Indo-Pacific, and the leaders of Taiwan, they have several times mentioned that they would want to play a larger role in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think we really need to find a way how to incorporate Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region. In fact, several countries have come up with the statement of support for Taiwan, specifically now with the COVID crisis is going on. So several countries came up with the statement to include Taiwan in the WHO World Health Assembly as an observer. And in fact, the 3 countries representative offices here, US, Japan, and Australia, they also representative offices are de facto embassies. So they also came up with this statement for supporting Taiwan's participation in WHO. Of course, India was missing, and India has its own concerns. India has its own problems. So India wasn't really a part of it. So I think India is one Quad country that is not really vocal about Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific or Taiwan's meaningful participation. But I think most of the countries, they believe that there is this China and there is this Taiwan. So, of course, no one is willing or trying to replace China with Taiwan. But the thing is that relations could actually go parallel. Countries could have relations with China, and then the same countries could also have unofficial relations with Taiwan as well. So, idea is this. The idea is not that China is actually aggressive. China is having issues with all the countries, has active territorial disputes with almost all the countries. So, Taiwan should take China's place. I don't think this is a good idea. Already countries actually advocating that, including the US or Japan and Australia. So yeah, I think the ties could go parallel, and a lot of countries adhere to one China policies. And in fact, almost all the countries, despite having issues with China, and India, specifically India, has this ongoing territorial dispute with China. Despite that, India adheres one China policy. So the thing is, the countries are not going to get away from one China policy. So we have to see within that framework how countries could actually elevate ties with Taiwan. So I think the focus should be on that. And there are several ways that we could actually enhance bilateral ties with Taiwan, as well as trilateral equation, or having some kind of mini lateral with Taiwan, where Taiwan is playing a meaningful role, or countries also benefiting from Taiwan's best practices. So I think this is what we really need to focus on.
That's quite interesting. So, in that context, I have a follow up question. So, we know that the quad by design and default features, as it is always said in data law. I'm saying design and default because it's a mini-lateral grouping. It's like an entity. It's not something like a multilateral body that everybody thinks of. And we know that the Indo-Pacific FYP, which is a concept, it has more to do with how European countries and the Western countries will invest in the Indo-Pacific, along with India being a key stakeholder. That's why the Indo part in the Indo-Pacific matters. And yes, beyond maritime issues, it covers many things. It covers climate security. It now covers health also due to the coronavirus pandemic, and it also covers rule of law. So you very well explained about how would Taiwan anchor its Indo-Pacific approaches and visions, which is very fair to understand. My question is regarding the Quad a little bit, and then you'll of course go up with Tibet in this portion. So we know very well that the Quad leaders for now, under the spirit of the Quad, whatever they call it, because even some people have considered that spelling Quad in a different manner, like not doing in full capital or small capital, and all of that matters. Still, in that sense, what we have seen is that while if you read all the statements and if you read the current approaches, of course, I agree on the fact that the Biden administration is very active on Taiwan and they have been already doing. I'm not sure how much it is on Tibet, but I think on Taiwan they are. So I may be wrong on the Tibet part, but yeah, on Taiwan I agree. So in that case, one irony is that they don't, and we know that India does not directly wish to challenge the one China policy consideration. Neither it wishes to directly state that we are just an anti-China China alliance in that sense. Australia doesn't, or no country does it directly, but of course they have some sense to explain that we have this fundamental thing with Quad that we wish to do. So with India, we see this reluctance. But in general, what if we see that there's one alternative also growing, since we know that India has been quite reluctant on this, but not in general for the Indo-Pacific, but for the Quad now. Boris Johnson is basically proposing that the United Kingdom should come for another alternative for the Quad, which is with the same per people, just replacing the United States. So if that also happens, I'm not sure if it will. Maybe it will be one of the most like generic groupings, like the US one or the Indo-Pacific Rim Association, where France is a very important member after Iran's approval, and this was subject to Iran's approval. So in that case, considering that the Indo-Pacific concept is always evolving, some people say it starts from India, some people say it starts from the African side, which is from the Suez Canal to Saudi Arabia and so on, which includes Maldives, Lakshadweep, and so on. Uh, how do you see it in the sense that if we have a UK-based Quad, then how would Taiwan consider the approach? So if you can explain on that, then we'll go to Tibet. Yeah.
I don't really see UK being very proactive with Taiwan. And also, even if UK is proposing that they should have a kind of minilateral or trilateral within the Indo-Pacific, so it's for their own interest. It's not for Taiwan, or it's not really aimed at China. So UK has its own interest in the Western Indian Ocean region. So how to secure their own interest in the Indo-Pacific region, I think, is one of the major concerns, and by one of the major one of the major processes would be to have a minilateral or have something like quadrilateral with other countries. For example, India, France, and Japan are also trying to have kind of mini trilateral within the Indo-Pacific. So countries are actually trying to find their own ways. So this is why I said this very important to distinguish between Quad and Indo-Pacific. And a lot of scholars, they believe that Quad is equal to Indo-Pacific. So it's not that, because a lot of countries that are embracing the Indo-Pacific are actually not willing to be a part of something that is overtly anti-China, and they are willing to form their own mini-lateral where their own interests are addressed. So every country has different equation with China. Some countries, for example, US is much more concerned about it's protecting its own supremacy in the world order. Then, like for example, India's main concern about China is to just manage ties with China and to find a solution to the boundary dispute and the other problem that has been going on with China. Japan has its own problem with China. So every other country has different level of intensity, different level of tensions with China. And if you talk about like Western European countries, their relationship with China is actually manageable. So I think when I look at their interest in the Indo-Pacific, they want to promote Indo-Pacific because they want to safeguard their own national interest. So I think China plays an important role in their own policies, but I think it's more about how do they partner with the countries in the region and how they secure their own interests in the Indo-Pacific region.
Yes, indeed. So let's go ahead with Tibet and understand the current situation which is going on. Uh, of course, I believe that I don't remember the name of the leader, but recently representing Tibet administration, basically the Tibetan region administration. He was featured on NewsX and other particular portals. He has been, I think, recently before Biden was inaugurated. Maybe if I may be wrong on the date, but maybe before Biden was inaugurated, he was invited by the Trump administration to represent Tibet and basically discuss about the concerns of the Tibetan people and Chinese colonialism. So we know that culturally, Tibet has changed a lot under China's infrastructure when it comes to development and all of that. And Tibet is historically very much even related to the Indian subcontinent and India as a civilization and also from a geographical point of view. So, I'd like to understand how is the US approach on Tibet going, and how far advocacy approaches have worked so far? Because I believe maybe the role of the Dalai Lama might be valuable or might not be valuable in this case. So, I'd like to know your insights on Tibet, and maybe we can discuss further on that.
I don't, of course, US took several steps last year, and then Lobsang Sangye, who was the ex-prime minister, president of CTA, he visited US last year and he did a lot of lobbying, and there was this act which was passed last year. So there is, of course, bipartisan support for Tibet, but the thing is, of course, Tibet is a core interest, like Taiwan is a core interest for China. Tibet is also a core interest, but the difference is that Tibet is actually, Tar is actually under China's control. And a lot of countries have actually accepted that Tar is a part of China. So, of course, then there is this Hanization which is going on. Most of the countries, they raise their voice with respect to Tibet when it comes to human rights issues. So now, of course, Tibet is in news, and we know that in 2011, the Dalai Lama, he relinquished his political power, and now he's just spiritual, a leader of Tibetans in India and elsewhere. So, but recently, what we have seen is actually there are two developments that are very important with respect to Tibet that have happened recently. And so the first development is, of course, the appointment, as you mentioned, the appointment of Penpa Tsering as the political leader of the Central Tibetan administration. So the election tells us that the Tibetan movement is deeply rooted in the democratic tradition of holding elections and freedom of voting. So this is exactly opposite to what the Chinese government has been doing in Tibet. So this is very important, and also this is one of the reasons. And the second development was that why China came up with this white paper on Tibet recently. So it is not coincidental that it actually happened just after the result of the elections. And as expected, it was mentioned that only China has the right to appoint the next Dalai Lama, and the white paper is there to consolidate its claim on Tibet further amid the elections in the CTA. So if you look at the words that were used in the white paper, such as domestic reforms and economic reforms, and how Tibet has been modernized over the past decades, and all these points, they point out that how China has been attempting to justify its activities in Tibet. So I think white papers are nothing more than the Chinese propaganda to convince. I won't say that they really want to convince the world, but at least they have done their bit, that this is what we have been doing. So the white paper, like always, it's a chronological account of the developments in Tibet, but of course it's a Chinese perspective. You don't know what is actually the Tibetan perspective, because they really don't have a voice anymore. They don't have a freedom to speak up, to use the internet, or to tell the world what is actually happening in Tibet. So the white paper has actually tried to justify Chinese claim by saying how Tibet was peacefully liberated and has been a part of China since time immemorial. So they claim that the projects in Tibet are a proof that China considers Tibet as its own part, like the other provinces in China, and how other provinces have been developed, they're also developing Tibet. And so this claim that Tibet has been modernized, and they actually want to show that how the development is at the same pace as other parts of China while giving the Tibetan full autonomy. Then I think this is so far from the truth. We scholars and policymakers have been talking about it since decades, and there have been several numerous incidents of human rights abuses, environmental degradation, and religious oppression in Tibet by China. And the plights of Tibetan can be gauged from the fact that the thousands of Tibetans have fled Tibet and also living in other countries, especially India. So I think instead of addressing these issues over the past 70 years, the CCP has become more aggressive and is leaving no stone unturned to assert that Tibet is an integral part of China. and that no interference from other countries will be accepted. And if countries do that, it will be considered as an intervention in China's internal matters. And they further claim that the idea of Tibet being free and independent is motivated by the Western imperialist powers who do not want to see a peaceful or a unified China. So they're actually pointing primarily towards the US, the Western world, the US and some of the European countries that have been actively talking about the suppression, the religious suppression, and the freedom in Tibet. So no matter what the Chinese say, it is amply clear that the growth and development work cited in the white paper and carried out in Tibet by the Chinese government is not for the development and the prosperity of Tibet and Tibetans, but for its own selfish motive. So I think this is very important when we talk about Tibet and CCP. And so even if US is doing all those things, the US is showing support. Several senators have been voicing their support for Tibet. But the thing is, I think nothing much could be done because Tibet has very well been integrated into this Chinese system. So, for example, I think I see more support, for example, for Xinjiang than for Tibet now. So I think this is, of course, the Dalai Lama is there. I think the presence of the Dalai Lama is one of the major reasons why countries actually see that there is some kind of uh, the Tibetan movement is still alive. But we also have to see what happens to the Tibetan movement when the Dalai Lama passes away. So I think this is what the Chinese leadership is waiting for, and they have already said that the next Dalai Lama will be installed by then. So I think the Tibetan movement will be kind of fizzled out if they don't have a strategy right now, and how the Tibetan activists are going to take it forward. So I think it's going to be fizzled out, because the thing is, it will be a total chaos when there would be two Dalai Lamas. And also the Dalai Lama hasn't yet really illustrated what is going to happen to the institution of the Dalai Lama. He has said several times, in fact, once he said that he might just abolish the system of reincarnation, or he just said that my next reincarnation could be a woman. So I think it's high time that he should also be open about what is going to happen when he's not around. So I think this is very important for Tibetan movement to progress.
That's very interestingly put. So you stated about the Chinese concerns and that happens with Taiwan also in that sense. I mean, it happens even for mainland China, and I would say other regions of China where disputes are there, territorial or whatever. And we see that the Chinese Communist Party has most of the time stated that it is Western imperialism which is being impeded, and the Western notion of human rights and many things. In fact, we have seen since the development of the UN that whenever international treaties have been formed, whether on political issues or human rights or anything related to it, and in 1992 we remember that there was a Bangkok Declaration on Human Rights, where certain countries in Southeast Asia and South Asia disagreed with the Western considerations, which was quite interesting. And Lee Kuan Yew founded Singapore in that sense. He developed Singapore. I mean, of course, there was some sort of development, but he did it. But my question, since I made the context here, is on this point. Now, we understand that the People's Republic of China, when makes rhetoric on the portion that human rights and all these concerns are Western created, we also see one particular, and I'm not saying that it is my view. It is something which is more of a view from the strategic American side, which we have seen, is that when you rightfully pointed out that there's a bipartisan consensus on Tibet. Like I remember Democrat AOC, Democrat party leader, party representative, not party leader, party representative, House representative from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then even the Republicans from Senate, like Ted Cruz and all of those people, they have very explicitly shown support for Tibet and Taiwan indirectly. For even Taiwan, even the Democrats are now pulling that, okay, let's talk about Taiwan and let's not ignore Tibet. Of course, there's a bipartisan consensus. However, being said that, we all understand that the CCP is imperialist because of the system that they have, and the CCP that represents China is not as the same as the Chinese empire is, because the understanding of the Chinese empire is something different, and the CCP is projecting both, I would say, exploiting ideological and other geographical considerations which are connected with it, right? That's the reason why Taiwan basically is an alternative for them, and Tibet is also seen, and even Xinjiang, for that matter, is seen. Still, so the question is now very direct on this. We also know that, however, the credibility of the Western powers with respect to democracy and political considerations is at a low these days, especially the United States. And why that is because their approach of balkanization of countries has also been a big problem. So, in case we need to maintain negotiations and to show that the Western powers, including those in the Indo-Pacific who support the Western powers like India, indirectly, of course, India is also currently it states that it's a non-aligned country. What should the West learn from its past experiences of Bosnia and other parts of Eastern Europe? What it has done, also how it has acted, because again, it should not be the case because of the experiences in Afghanistan. So how that particular problem could be tackled when it comes to Taiwan and Tibet, because both of them matter. And whether we agree or not, it is a sort of a balkanization thing, even if for the considerations of political democracy for CCP. So if yes, it is being justified, how it should be done, because of course we can't repeat Libya or anything like that. So just understanding of what the Western powers should do.
I think it's a very different situation. So the thing is, in IR, there is never a similar situation. So you can't have similar approaches to do different problems. But with Taiwan, I think what could be done is, so I think there are a lot of articles which I've seen which actually says that China is going to wage a war because it was an objective before the 100th anniversary of the CCP, or before the before 2050, and in 2-3 years they are going to attack Taiwan. So it's not going to happen, and I would tell you why. Because I think first reason is the stakes are very high, and they are not going to attack Taiwan unless and until they're sure that the outcome is in their favor. And second thing is that if more and more countries are going to come out in support of Taiwan, that the chances of China attacking Taiwan will actually be less. So what China wants is that countries don't speak about Taiwan. So if they don't speak about Taiwan, so in a way, there would be a thing that, okay, all these countries, if they are not really speaking in support of Taiwan, there is a way that China could convince all these countries that Taiwan was a part of China, but it was never a part of China. The CCP has never actually governed or ruled, or it has never governed the island of Taiwan. So the very basis that Taiwan is a part of China, PRC and CCP should be ruling Taiwan, and it shouldn't be there, because the thing is, it has always been a very different entity. So the thing is, if more and more countries are talking about Taiwan, then China is actually deterred to not confront Taiwan militarily. So what it wants, that countries stop talking about Taiwan so that it could consolidate its position, its claim on Taiwan. So I think that what all these Western countries, including countries in the region such as Japan, Australia, India, they need to really talk about Taiwan. They really need to voice this support for Taiwan. And I think it's very important, because the thing is, any stance of a military confrontation between Taiwan and China is really going to destabilize the entire region. And it is going to have repercussions for countries such as India and Japan, who are actually in the region, and the entire Asian security. So I think to prevent that, and to deter China from actually even thinking of going and attacking Taiwan, it's very important that all these countries come in support of Taiwan. And I'm not saying that they need to come in support and they need to establish diplomatic ties with Taiwan, or they should just provoke China. But they really need to just include Taiwan at a larger international platform, so that Taiwan, because Taiwan is also okay. There is of course conflict about Taiwan's status. Taiwan is a country. Of course, I consider Taiwan as a country, because there are like 24 million people who are living here, and there is a full-fledged democratic government here. So you can't really disregard all these factors even before just talking about Taiwan. So I think it's very important that all these factors are taken into consideration, and all these countries come in support of Taiwan, because when these countries are talking about rules-based order, when they talk about free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, then Taiwan, if countries are not talking about Taiwan, then I believe that their Indo-Pacific policies are actually not comprehensive enough. because Taiwan is also a fellow like-minded democracy, which is very much in the region. So I think all these countries, they really need to be more aligned on Taiwan.
That's really interesting to hear about. So, I have a question with regards to the South China Sea, and how can in future the approaches of Taiwan and China be considered separate, despite the fact that Taiwan is a proper democracy, Taiwan has a better health infrastructure, Taiwan has a good deal of people, Taiwan is amazing technology leader. There is Taiwanese investment in the Indo-Pacific region. We know in India and other countries that's a fact. So I had a question with Salvatore some time back, and I asked him about the Taiwanese approach to the Indo-Pacific and the thing with kind of replacing China's dominance in the region itself, because of the simple reasons that there are real concerns that Chinese companies and Chinese entities, even Chinese gongos, are very predatory. Considering that, uh, one thing which he stated, and it might be wrong, and it could be taken into consideration, is that the Taiwanese approach to the South China Sea, especially, and the CCP's approach to the South China Sea, which is PRC, are not so much different. So, of course, one concern, he gave an example, but what he tried to raise was that one problem with Taiwan, which comes in general, in regular terms, is that, let's say, yes, you are a democracy, you want representation in international bodies, and which is fine also. I mean, in WHA or anywhere where you need it. I mean, I don't think a UN membership is going to be so easy, but I remember that Taiwan is already indirectly acting along with a country known as Somaliland, which is not again a UN member, but in Somaliland there are US missions, and they are trying to patch up and have some connectivity around. So Somaliland is one African country which we can take as an example. Considering that, how do you see Taiwan's approach in general different, emerging terms, when it comes to South China Sea and all of those, as compared to the CCP? Because he claims that in general it's nearly the same. And I'm just taking one example, but from that one example we can infer a lot. So, please.
So actually, those would so whatever PRC is claiming or has claimed with respect to its territorial disputes, those were actually ROC, Republic of China's claims. So they're actually in the constitution of the ROC. But of course, this is there, and with the South China Sea, now China claims China has this 9-line, so ROC was actually 11-line. So of course it's there, but I don't see now the current ruling party really reinforcing such claims. I really haven't seen DPP or the current Taiwan government claiming that we have to have our stakes in the South China Sea. We see sometimes in the East China Sea, but I think for a very long time they haven't really pressed those claims as well. So the thing is, what we have to really see here, that these claims are in the constitution. Of course, it's not very easy to change the constitution. And so I don't think, if, for example, tomorrow Taiwan becomes an independent country with the current party, I don't think they are going to reinforce such claims. So I think we will have to really see how they change their policy. But of course, it's not it's just a hypothetical situation. We really don't know what is going to be the future of Taiwan. Of course, what Taiwanese people and what the current leadership want is, they want to have status quo, and they really don't want independence, or they really, of course, don't want to go for a military confrontation with China. What they want is status quo. So, of course, they're also there, but they really don't talk about it. And of course, ROC also has claims in Indian territory as well. So they really don't talk about it. And of course, a lot of people say that Taiwan needs to just come in open and say that they really do not claim all these territories anymore. But the thing is, they also have to see that it is not very easy to change the constitution and to just take a decision like that. For example, last year, so the state-owned airline is called China Airlines. And there were instances where China Airline was actually wrongly seen as an airline which belongs to the PRC. So there were actually calls for changing the name of their state-owned airline, but it's not very easy to just take a decision of that sort. So we have to take that into consideration. But I think Taiwan now specifically with DPP in power, and with Taiwan has this new policy to engage the countries of Southeast Asia plus Australia and New Zealand, the new southbound policy. So I think the focus is less on China. Of course, one of the factors is that they want to reduce dependence on China, but I think the more focus is on engaging the like-minded countries, engaging and having meaningful partnership with countries in the region. So we also have to take all these factors into consideration. I think this is a very hawkish view. Whenever someone says, "Oh, what about Taiwan's claim, ROC's claim on South China Sea? What about ROC's claim on Indian territory?" So I think that's a very hawkish view, and we really need to get away from such kind of narrative.
No problem with that. My job was to ask questions, and I thought that maybe it could be a one interesting point of
No, I
contention
think we
to.
need discussion on this, but I've seen a lot of, like, for example, on my comments under videos, several things, and I've seen this. You advocate for Taiwan India partnership. But what about this? So it's not about you. Of course, your job is to ask question, but this
Yeah,
is what I've come across several times. So I feel that's a very hawkish view of looking at our Taiwan.
no, I understand that. I completely understand that point. So we are up with a final question, and then maybe you can give your concluding remarks on whatever questions I've asked and how it's just to be seen. So we will be seeing in some years that India will try to shift its approach towards Taiwan. Will it will happen? Of course, there are good enough economic relations with Taiwan. It will try to even increase it because if we see the Quad's approach to critical technologies, India needs to align with the Indo-Pacific countries because we all know that, of course, except Taiwan, most of the Indo-Pacific countries, except India, and I believe not Japan is also there, and Australia is also there. They are a part of the RCEP. So, and ASEAN has a great deal of vulnerability, and that vulnerability comes in because they are just an economic system. They are just an economic framework, and India's leadership will matter a lot as it will be trying to align with Taiwan. So in that case, what suggestions would you like to give on how India should take the approach on economic and technological terms? Of course, through diplomacy, and of course, it's a long-term process. And I agree that, of course, if we remove the part on hawkish view, of course, Taiwan is still a very reliable stakeholder when it is compared to the PRC. So, I mean, that is something which is definitely agreeable. So, in that sense, what India should do, of course, there cannot be one short term approach. There will be certain steps which will be taken to exacerbate any, I would say, turf happening with China or at diplomatic level, at military level, at the maritime level, or so forth. But from a perspective of technology diplomacy and a perspective of economics, how should India help? Because I believe that in the Indo-Pacific, India is a very important stakeholder, and it will increase its engagement with South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and all these important countries. So, how should it do, considering Taiwan at the center of it?
It's a very valid question, though, of course. It's a basic question, but I think enough discussion hasn't really taken place on this, as in we need to have more and more policy recommendations because India is somewhat cautious with Taiwan. But I would say that in terms of economics and technology, India already has somewhat robust ties with Taiwan. So India's main interest lies in having strengthened commercial ties, and so there is, of course, a dialogue between commerce secretaries between India and Taiwan. So it's happening. Of course, the volume of trade is pretty low. It's just below 6 billion, and if you compare it with India's trade with other countries or Taiwan's trade with other countries, is nothing. But I feel both sides uh, trying to see how commercial ties could be strengthened, and also specifically in technology. There's a lot of track 1.5 and track 2 dialogue that's happening in the field of technology. But I feel that specifically after last year, what we have seen, and we saw that that was kind of unprecedented, that Taiwan got so much support from Indians, and there was a lot of awareness that was generated for Taiwan. So I think we really need to take cues from that, and we really need to say that India has to have a robust Taiwan policy now. So, of course, there were several developments. I'm not saying that there weren't any developments between India-Taiwan relations. Of course, specifically since the establishment of the representative offices in each of the respective capitals in 1995, the relations have come a long way. Several agreements have been signed in the field of education, economy, agriculture, culture, and technology. So several agreements have been signed and several parliamentary exchanges have been taken place between two sides. But what we saw that there is a halt in the relationship in the past 3-4 years. So I think this is why I said that now India really needs to shed its hesitance and it needs to have a robust Taiwan policy. And as I also mentioned in one of the last question, that India really needs to look at Taiwan not from China lens, and India's Taiwan policy should not be a subset of its China policy. And in fact, this is a stated policy by Taiwan. So, in fact, former India's representative, Taiwan's representative to India, he mentioned in several interviews as well. And in fact, if you look at official statement, they have mentioned that India's relation with Taiwan and China could go parallel. And I'm saying this because what we have seen that when there are tensions with China, there are calls to move closer to Taiwan, specifically at the civil society level. So I think we don't really have to see Taiwan through the China lens anymore. And in fact, in 2017 Parliamentary Committee report, they also recommended that India should establish diplomatic ties with Taiwan. But that was also in the aftermath of the Doklam standoff. So there was this connection between India's problem with China and Taiwan. So it's important to note that the relations with Taiwan has its own merit. I think we really can't emphasize in this enough. And I think it's a flawed thinking to use Taiwan as a leverage against China and Taiwan as a card, all these terms. And I've also seen several opinion pieces, specifically from several Indians, that, we have issues with China. Why don't you go and establish firmer ties with Taiwan? So I think these two sentences, these two arguments in one sentence, I really don't want to, I don't want India to have such kind of a policy towards Taiwan. So I think if India goes for such a policy, Taiwan will be neglected again when the relations with China gets back to normal, because we have to see if China becomes accommodative tomorrow, countries are going to take that opportunity to normalize ties with China. So what will happen with Taiwan? So this is why I say that you have to engage Taiwan on its own merit. And for India, I think it's very important to get away from this ad hoc approach, which is kind of practice when it comes to Taiwan. So I think last year there was momentum in the relations, and both sides are also trying to sustain this momentum. So, but how do we build this momentum? So I think this is the thing which I've been saying in all my presentations and all my talks. Is very important that, okay, the momentum was built, but how do you sustain this momentum? So you really have to, both the countries really have to do more to sustain this momentum. I believe that there could be a lot of things that could be done. And one of the things is, of course, economic relations. Of course, I said that both countries are trying to do a lot more to establish firmer economic ties. But I still believe, as I said, the volume of trade is pretty low. And also there are a little more than 100 Taiwanese companies in India, but the amount of investment is just, accumulative investment is just a little more than 3 billion. So Taiwan is also looking to invest in countries such as India, Vietnam, the new Southern policy countries. So I think it's very important that more should be done with respect to economic relations. And we saw that recently the free trade agreement negotiation was started between India and the US. So I think there is also, India could take a cue from that, because the thing is, there were talks for a feasibility study for the free trade agreement between India and Taiwan in 2011 and 12. And in fact, a feasibility study was carried out at that point of time. So India was very much interested, but at that point of time, Taiwan under Kuomintang and under Ma Ying-jeou, it wasn't really active, and it wasn't really willing to have an FTA, because they were also focusing on stabilizing their ties with China. So at that point of time, the talks fizzled out. But I think it is the time that we put these into practice now. And it is more important when India has made it clear that it is not going to be a part of BRI in its current form, and all these countries are trying to establish their own mechanism, their own arrangements within the Indo-Pacific framework. So I think Taiwan could play an important role. And within the Indo-Pacific framework, and if countries could have multilateral economic arrangements with Taiwan, and also at the bilateral level. So I think in terms of economic ties, there are a lot of things which both countries could do. And also products that are made in Taiwan are far more superior than the Chinese products. And India is trying to reduce dependence on Chinese products, and also banning Chinese app. So I think it will be mutually beneficial if a more sustained focus is given on economic ties, which is happening, and it will take some more time. But I think both countries really need to come up with more initiatives to increase the volume trade and also the investment from Taiwan, because Taiwan is very well interested in that. And I think secondly, it's very important. I've been advocating this for a very long time, that we need to have more people to people contacts between India and Taiwan. Of course, it's happening. We are seeing that there's a lot of awareness about Taiwan in India, but still not a lot of people know about Taiwan in India. And Taiwan is a very important place for tourism, and we have just seen that 45,000 Indians visit Taiwan, and even a lesser number of Taiwanese go to India. So of course, the TDB, the Taiwan Tourism Bureau, office is there in India, and they are trying to attract uh, tourists to Taiwan. But I think more could be done in this sector also. And of course, I believe that there needs to be more scholarly exchanges between India and Taiwan. It's very important for scholars from India and Taiwan to reach out to each other, so that we know what Taiwan's position is, and Taiwan knows what India wants from Taiwan, and how it could affect India's position in the region. So I think we need to have more scholarly discussions. And in the same context, I think we also need to have greater institutional cooperation between Indian and Taiwanese think tanks and universities. So it's when we talk to Taiwan, when we talk to Taiwanese scholars, just not that we are getting to know about Taiwan, we're also getting to know more about China. So I think there's a lot of archival material also, but a lot of people, they don't really realize that it's important to go to Taiwan and refer to material in Taiwan. So I think it's very important that we establish institutional linkages between India and Taiwan. Then, of course, I think media linkages should also be strengthened. There's not even a single Indian journalist that is stationed here, and I've been saying that we really need an Indian correspondent that is who's stationed in Taiwan. So I think for also generating, when we talk about awareness, generating awareness about Taiwan, having a media personnel in Indian media personnel in Taiwan would also help this cause. So I think it's very important. And then I think more and more students need to come here for higher studies as well as the Mandarin language. So students come here, but I think more students couldn't apply for it. Students aren't really aware about the existing courses for Mandarin language and other things. So I think there needs to be more and more awareness about such courses, so that people come and learn traditional Chinese. And I think there are a lot of myths about learning traditional Chinese. So of course, it's Taiwan's job, and of course India's, to tell the students that Taiwan could be a potential destination to learn the language. Then I think that regular exchanges at academic, people to people, and media levels are mutually beneficial and should be promoted. And I think people to people has the potential to be translated into political actions. I've been saying that it's not that we have to wait for government to government level interaction. If people to people contacts are there and they're stronger, then I think it has the potential to be translated into something bigger, and it could motivate the government to take actions further. So I think it's very important that we take all these factors into consideration. And then you also mentioned about health cooperation with the prevalence of COVID-19 and how Taiwan dealt with it last year. I think it's very important that countries look at health cooperation and make health cooperation a crucial part of the Indo-Pacific, and also of their policies towards Taiwan. And specifically with India, I believe that cooperation in health sector could help solidify the rules-based order. Then I think India may also explore the possibility of cooperation under this framework, which is led by Taiwan, and US and Japan are a part of it. That's called Global Cooperation and Training Framework. So US, Japan, and in fact, Taiwan, they have been having several meetings, and it's primarily to learn from there to learn Taiwan's best practices. And we have also seen that several Western countries have also taken part in some of the workshops to see how it could benefit them. So I think India should also start thinking about being a part of, if not in the long term. So I think in like short term, it should think of becoming a part of GCTF. I think it's very important that India looks at Taiwan, that it's going to benefit India if it goes and engages Taiwan.
Indeed. That reminds me of a very interesting thing. So on Instagram, we have generally seen ads from various countries, right? USA, UK, and many. I saw an ad from a Taiwanese institute or something like that, some Taiwanese company, and they literally showed in that ad, you know what? just come and learn Mandarin, you will get particular scholarship or you'll get particular discounts. I think maybe it's late, but I think it's starting. And I think, as you very rightly pointed out, what I would like to infer here is that with Taiwan, one thing which is very understandable is that, of course, governments matter, but at the same time, there should be private actors like people, civil society, companies, academia, who should shift from an Asia Pacific angle to an Indo Pacific angle. I think that will benefit Taiwan a lot. So of course we could not discuss Russia in that sense. I mean, how Taiwan and Russia would do. Maybe we would discuss next time. But I think it was an amazing discussion with you, ma'am, and thank you so much. To be fair enough, this I have been thinking to do since reading your expertise and other things, and I thought that let's have a balanced discussion on understanding Taiwan and Tibet in that sense, considering Chinese colonialism. So thank you so much for attending the session, and it was a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you. I had a lovely time discussing Taiwan and Tibet and Taiwan India relations. Thank you for having me on your show.